The barren, windswept plains of northern Utah hide secrets darker than any storm cloud could ever reveal. From UFO sightings and unexplainable wormholes to cryptid encounters and cattle mutilations, this isolated corner of the world has earned a reputation as a haunted epicenter. Whispers of poltergeists and strange, shadowy figures linger in the air like a thick fog, and even the most diehard skeptics find themselves questioning what they thought they knew. And at the heart of it all lies one place, Skinwalker Ranch. This haunting ground, long avoided by the Ute tribe, is said to sit on the very path of the Skinwalker, a malevolent spirit feared by many. For generations, no one dared to trespass on this land, until in 1994, the Shermans arrived, seeking a quiet, secluded haven. What they found, however, was far from the tranquil retreat they had hoped for. Instead, they uncovered a nightmare that would stretch the limits of their sanity. The land was beautiful. Its rolling hills, thick forests, and a serene creek seemed peaceful at first glance. But the longer the Shermans stayed, the more they realized that beauty here was merely a mask. They were drawn to this 480-acre property by its seemingly perfect isolation, but it didn't take long for them to uncover the first unsettling signs. The house was locked down tighter than a fortress. Deadbolts, chains, and metal rungs embedded in the walls suggested an unsettling history of fear, a story whispered only in the darkest corners of the land. Yet, the Shermans dismissed these as quirks of an eccentric previous owner, never suspecting that the land's true horror was just beginning to unfold. From the moment they moved in, the ranch revealed its twisted nature. On their first day, as they unloaded their truck, an eerie silence descended. It was then they saw it, a wolf, but not like any wolf they'd ever known. At least 3 times the size of any normal wolf, it approached without fear, its piercing blue eyes locking with theirs as if it knew them. Its movements were unnervingly calm, even friendly, as it padded toward them, wagging its tail as though it had wandered from another world entirely. But as the wolf drew closer, a growing unease took root in Terry's chest. There was something wrong, something unnatural about the way it moved, too perfect, too controlled. Despite the creature's friendly demeanor, the feeling of dread in the air was suffocating. No one could shake the feeling that they were no longer visitors, but trespassers. As Terry's father reached out to touch the massive beast, it became clear. This place had never been safe, and it would never let them leave. The tension in the air was thick as Terry and his son moved swiftly towards the pen, where 4 of their breeding cows and their calves stood, visibly disturbed by the wolf's presence. Yet one young calf, curious and unaware of the danger, stuck its head out from between the metal bars, watching the unfolding scene with wide eyes. Before Terry could fully process the growing threat, the wolf lunged. In an instant, its monstrous jaws clamped around the calf's head, the animal's desperate bleats filling the air as it thrashed wildly in a futile attempt to escape. Without hesitation, Terry grabbed an axe handle from the back of his truck, rushing toward the beast, swinging wildly at its massive body. But the wolf seemed impervious, its cold eyes locked on its prey as though it were in a trance. "Get my magnum!" Terry shouted, his voice cracking with urgency. His son sprinted to the truck, grabbed the .357 Magnum, and handed it over with trembling hands. Terry aimed and fired once, twice, 3 times, each shot echoing across the empty pasture. But the wolf showed no sign of injury. It didn't stagger, didn't yelp in pain, didn't even flinch. It simply continued its brutal assault on the calf. Frantic, Terry fired again, this time aiming for the heart. The wolf, after what seemed like an eternity, reluctantly released its grip and backed off, retreating a mere 10 feet. But it stood there, unbothered, unwavering, as if contemplating its next move. Terry could feel the air grow colder. His son, now visibly shaken, rushed back to the house for a rifle, and Terry fired once more. This time, a chunk of flesh tore away from the wolf's side, but it still didn't fall. It merely stepped back, unbothered, as if mocking their efforts. Then, with a final glance toward the calf, the wolf turned and trotted off, disappearing into the night without a trace of injury. Confused and terrified, Terry and his son followed the creature through the woods, their steps quickening as they traced its paw prints across the soft earth. But when they reached the mud bank near the creek, the tracks suddenly stopped. vanished into thin air as though the wolf had never been there at all. Returning to the homestead, Terry picked up the piece of flesh that had been torn from the wolf. It was not fresh. No blood, no scent of life. It was decayed, rotting, as if it had been lying out in the sun for days. A chill ran down his spine as he gazed toward the horizon, the weight of what had just happened settling over him like a heavy fog. That was only the beginning. Over the next few weeks, the eerie occurrences escalated, each one more unsettling than the last. Gwen, at first, chalked it up to her imagination, but things were becoming impossible to ignore. Groceries would mysteriously reappear in their bags after she had already unpacked them. Her towel and hairbrush, left on the counter, would vanish from the bathroom, only to reappear hours later in random locations around the house. As the days wore on, Gwen's unease grew, and Terry began to share her suspicions. It all came to a head one evening when Terry came inside, demanding to know who had taken his post digger. The heavy tool had been left in the pasture, but now it was gone. He and Gwen searched for hours, but it was nowhere to be found. Weeks later, they discovered the post digger, a 70-pound tool, hanging high in a tree, over 70 feet off the ground. No one could explain how it had gotten there. And as if that wasn't strange enough, the next event pushed them over the edge. A few days before the post digger was found, Terry took his nephew and son on a tour of the ranch. It was well after sunset when they started back toward the homestead, but something caught Terry's eye. Headlights, moving across the distant fence line, well within the boundaries of their property. But there was no car, no sound of an engine, only the unsettling glow of lights that seemed to flicker like a ghostly apparition. Terry had seen these lights before, dismissing them initially as wayward travelers who had taken a wrong turn off the road to the east, but tonight as he spotted them once again, a deep suspicion began to settle in. These people, whoever they were likely hunting on his land without permission. Determined to confront them, Terry began marching toward the distant glow. But as he quickened his pace, something strange happened. The lights began to move away from him, as though they were aware of his approach. His brisk walk turned into a jog, the boys following closely behind, confusion mounting in their minds. Why was there no sound of an engine? As they got within 100 yards, the lights suddenly lifted off the ground, defying all logic. They floated up above the treetops, continuing their silent journey before disappearing entirely into the night sky. Terry and the boys stood frozen in their tracks, eyes wide with disbelief. What they had just witnessed felt like something out of a dream or a nightmare. As autumn wore on, the lights became a frequent occurrence, especially after Terry began bringing in his prized Simmental and Angus cattle. The activity seemed to intensify with the arrival of his high-end livestock, and this is when things started to spiral out of control. By winter, the region had been battered by severe snowstorms, and Terry found himself working round the clock, searching for cattle that had wandered too far from the ranch. One late evening, he was out on horseback, searching for one of his prized Angus cows, which had been missing for almost 24 hours. He had covered the entire ranch, except for a dense area of woodland to the southwest, an area he was now heading toward. As he neared the tree line, he spotted the unmistakable impressions of hoof prints in the deep snow. His heart lifted. He was close, he thought. But as he followed the tracks for 20 yards into the trees, they led to a wide clearing. The prints continued out into the open space, then stopped. The cow was gone. A chill ran down Terry's spine as he recalled the wolf's tracks from weeks ago, which had also abruptly ended, as if the animal had vanished into thin air. He searched the area for a while longer, but there was no sign of the cow. With a heavy heart, he turned back toward the homestead, but the sense of unease clung to him like the bitter cold of the winter air. Over the course of the next few months, 4 more of Terry's prized cows and bulls disappeared under similarly mysterious circumstances. The losses were not just financially devastating, they were deeply personal. Each animal was a product of Terry's hard work, and losing them felt like a piece of himself was being ripped away. Terry began spending long nights outdoors, lurking in the shadows, hoping to catch a glimpse of whoever or whatever was taking his cattle. The lights, now a common sight on the ranch, always seemed to elude him. No matter how quietly he moved, they always stayed just out of reach. Then, one early morning, after another fruitless night, Terry saw something that made his blood run cold. In his peripheral vision, a black mass hovered about 100 yards to his left, silhouetted against the pale white snow. He hunkered down, heart-pounding, as he watched the strange object drift across the land. It resembled a snub-nosed version of an F-1117 Nighthawk, but something was wrong. There was no sound, no hum of an engine, no whir of propellers. The object floated about 20 feet above the ground, its hull emitting colored lights that flickered over the snow, as though it were searching for something. Terry watched, mesmerized and terrified, as the object made its way west, before turning and heading east again. His body was frozen, numb from the cold, and when he finally shifted his weight, the sound of his joints cracking seemed deafening in the oppressive silence. Suddenly, the lights on the strange craft blinked out. The object stopped and slowly turned in his direction. For a few tense moments, it felt as though the craft was glaring at him, assessing him, but to his relief, it silently turned again and floated north, disappearing into the dark sky. In the new year, as spring rains battered the ranch, things grew worse. Cattle began to reappear, some dead, others mutilated beyond recognition. Huge chunks of flesh and skin were removed with eerie precision, yet there was no blood. The wounds were surgical, as though a sharp instrument had been used, not the teeth or claws of a predator. The Shermans were overwhelmed, their nerves stretched thin by the constant loss. And as 1995 wore on, the strange events escalated. The lights appeared over the ranch almost every night, and the house became a place of terror, with poltergeist-like activity and unsettling encounters. Black, featureless entities began to appear, staring through the windows before entering the house. Terry couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was haunting their land wasn't just after their cattle, it was after something much worse. Standing at the foot of their beds, strange sounds would reverberate through the ground, almost as if there were machinery or railroad tracks hidden beneath their feet. Their neighbors heard it too, disembodied voices speaking in unknown languages, seemingly coming from the sky. One morning, Terry awoke to find strange cookie-cutter-like holes dug into the land. However, there were no piles of earth to be found anywhere, as though hundreds of pounds of soil had been silently removed from his property in the dead of night. As if that wasn't unsettling enough, peculiar creatures were spotted crossing the land. Some resembled humanoid, Bigfoot-like figures, while others appeared to be bizarre canine-hyena hybrids, their razor-sharp claws attacking the livestock. There was also an invisible entity, often felt but never seen directly. Livestock would part in panic, as if something enormous and unseen was running through the middle of the herd. Water in the canal would shift violently, as if invisible feet stomped through it. A smaller, cloaked creature, much like the alien from the movie Predator, was also spotted occasionally. Stationary orange lights, unlike the usual moving ones Terry often observed, appeared in the sky. The first time he saw one, it was a warm summer evening, and he was sitting on his porch when an orange object appeared about a mile away. He quickly grabbed his rifle's high-powered scope and aimed it at the object. What he saw stunned him. An opening in the air, as if it were a portal, with a blue sky visible through it, despite the sun having already set. The strange anomalies continued, with odd-shaped crafts seen entering and exiting these openings above the ranch. But the most disturbing of all were the orbs. Though they weren't as frequent as the lights or portals, when they did appear, they were far more obvious. These orbs, mostly about the size of a tennis ball and blood red, would zip in and out of nearby trees, harassing the livestock. Occasionally, larger blue orbs, nicknamed blue meanies, would show up. These orbs emitted a terrifying fear that seemed to resonate with those who got too close. Terry and Gwen never fully understood the source of the fear, but they knew those blue orbs were more dangerous than anything they had encountered on the ranch. One evening, as Terry observed the lights from his porch, he noticed a blue glow coming from the tree line near his house. Instinctively on guard, he watched as one of the blue orbs emerged and began moving toward him. With his 3 best hunting dogs by his side, the moment they saw the orb, they began growling and barking furiously. Without thinking, Terry released them. and the dogs chased the orb back into the trees. But just as quickly, the dogs stopped barking, followed by 3 pained yelps and then silence. Terry waited for hours, but his dogs never returned. The next morning, he and his son went to search the trees where the dogs had last been seen. What they found shocked them: 3 cauterized piles of flesh smoldering in the cool morning air. This was the breaking point for the Sherman family. They had endured more than anyone should, and it was taking a toll. The kids were struggling at school, Gwen had lost her job, and the family was no longer sleeping due to the constant disturbing phenomena. They had lost 14 head of cattle along with family pets, and they were teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. The sight of their vaporized dogs made it clear just how much danger they were in. Terry had previously contacted a local newspaper about the strange happenings on the ranch, but his story had been ridiculed. However, it caught the attention of Robert T. Bigelow, a billionaire businessman who had recently funded a scientific team to investigate high strangeness phenomena. Bigelow offered to purchase the ranch, and the Shermans, desperate to leave, accepted. By July 1996, the Sherman family vacated the property. Bigelow's team, the National Institute for Discovery Science, NIES, moved in by September. They would spend nearly a decade on the ranch, investigating and documenting the bizarre events that had terrorized the Shermans. What they encountered was as mysterious and terrifying as what the family had lived through. And so, whatever had been tormenting the Sherman family was about to face its own investigation, from a well-equipped team of researchers who were ready for whatever it had in store. The hunter, it seemed, was about to become the hunted.